What do you make of the disturbing rise of political violence, dark times? I mean, we've kind of been over this one, but it is. I mean, of all the things, am I worried about an economy going south? Of course, I think people are always. If you're not actively worried about it, it's in the back of your mind. Even if you're having good times, you're like, how long is the economy going to last? And then certainly there are some reasons to be worried about the economy. So, like, I worry about the economy. I worry about things anyone else would worry about, like you know security threats to your family, to your life, to the nation, whatever. All the different ways in which that part of your, like, that easy part of your life could be disrupted. I do worry about that, but I don't worry about that like I have in the last day. Like I worried about our social cohesion. Like I'm just gonna say it one more time. Like, do you just have to? You have to ask yourself, under what conditions do nations descend? Okay, under what conditions do nations descend into political violence? And there's many, many different reasons for that. There can be religious, sectarian differences. You can get into ethnic cleansing and genocide, but other ones that sound familiar to you and us, or you and me, might be, media and political polarization, social inequality, weak and declining institutions. You could say, in addition, you know, uh, well, I mean, any of those factors could be involved, and it's like we don't have all of those things happening here. Certainly, we don't have any on stateside, any kind of genocide or ethnic cleansing that I am aware of. But some of those other things we absolutely do have, and that happens when the things that give government legitimacy and when it offers effectiveness, it's when those things are in deep, deep decline. Also, I think our media environment is unhealthy, but part of that is kind of related to this broader social fraying and decay. Um, these are extremely troubling, extremely troubling, because the thing that I have noticed in my life about political violence, and there's different kinds of political violence that some people you might not consider. If we're talking about citizens who are apprehended, or legal residents, or people who have legitimate visas, and then they're left in conditions where they're diabetics and they're stuck in ICE detention camps, including but not limited to Alligator Alcatraz, and they're being, people who are being denied, diabetes treatment, who should not be there. To me, this is a form of political violence, but certainly there are many, many forms. But if we're talking about just the straight up killing of political opponents, including, like, extremely prominent media figures, and then the next step is, I mean, there's already been obviously political assassinations of candidates, but you would imagine more is on its way. That means we are fraying at the seams. We are fraying at the seams. That means that, I mean, I want to say one thing. I brought this up many times. We still have no clue what again, as I speak to you now, we don't have any clue what the shooter's motivations are. Even some of the initial reporting that went out today, as I mentioned, has already been challenged. And this is one story I always tell, which is John Hinckley shot Ronald Reagan because he thought by doing that he would impress the Hollywood actress Jodie Foster, by the way, a lesbian, but irrelevant, like an insane person. And we'd have no clue to what extent that has any relationship to this present situation. But the problem with political violence, among many other ones, including the death that it leads to, and the despair, and then the absolute torching of the social cohesion that is required to make a democracy work. Aside from all of that, one of the other problems is that it is a cancer in that it's unpredictable once it gets going. Right? So one side does something, or it's perceived to have done something, then the other side reacts, and not only do you get a tit for tat kind of battle, but the ways in which that can spill out into other groups, or the ways in which that can spill out to much larger forms of disaster, or just how utterly uncontrollable it is, and then what that means for so many ordinary Americans, and what that means for you and me, and what that means for any of us. All of that becomes imperiled when you start having political assassinations. and high profile ones at that. This is what I mean. It's like this is one of the worst things it's not just this one, because there is a common response that I think is a fair one, which was, right, well, what about the two state senators in Minnesota who were killed in their house? And they were even mocked by their political adversaries. President Trump refused to even call the governor in that case, and actually mocked the reporter asking if he would. And Mike Lee, the senator, mocked it and then had to delete his tweets when it came out that this person had a weird and unusual background, but he himself had identified as a supporter of the president. But he was a psycho too. Like, it was not one thing or the other. The point I'm trying to make is there wasn't much said about that, even though that was a horrifying incident, and two people were killed, and that they killed a dog there as well. But there's a difference, is that one, there wasn't on camera, like we didn't all become witness to it. This was some kind of like traumatic viral moment that we all were like, if you open Twitter, it was fucking everywhere, which was not awesome, by the way. And then the second component there is Kirk is significantly more famous than the two of them. He's a much bigger figure. You can argue about what relative importance there is if he's not even a political officer, and then they are on a smaller scale. They weren't federal senators, they were state senators, but nevertheless, there's a significant political relevance there. But as a like, who's more well known, he is of significantly greater visibility, and that changes, plus the virality and the visibility of it all, that just completely changes the equation, I think, to a pretty strong degree, about partly why you saw, not totally, part of it is that there's elements of the right that just love mocking this kind of thing, like they did with Pelosi, and suggesting that her husband was hiring a prostitute. They just can't come to grips. They're very good at inventorying the acts of their opponents, but very good at not noticing the ones that are not convenient to their narrative. Nevertheless, I can also recognize that the size of the figure in terms of his popularity and visibility in Kirk, and then the horrible public nature of it all, changes the equation of it. And then for that reason, it's like, that's why this one is even more dangerous. Yeah, bad, extremely bad. Rick says, quote, Trump, Kirk, trans mass shooters. Why has the left become so politically violent? Do you believe the media is to blame for demonizing conservatives? It is very, very difficult for me to take seriously people who support a man by the name of Donald Trump and then worry about the demonization by others against them. I mean, it is absurd to even make such a claim when I'm assuming that you have support for Donald Trump, who has done his very level best for as long as he has been politically active to say things about his political opponents that is not just considered verboten in some kind of sense for decorum, but because it is, from a rhetorical standpoint, incredibly dangerous, including what he said last night, which weirdly had a kind of AI component to it. And then there's pictures of him having a drooping face today. I don't know what that means. I suppose we'll something to monitor going forward. But that's the first reply I would make, is that it's an extremely disingenuous charge from people who have followed a guy who has coarsened and radicalized American politics singularly more than any other person from any other party in this country during the course of my lifetime. That's the first thing I'm going to reply. The second thing I'm going to reply is more to the point. I mean, I didn't see a lot of outcry about the person at the CDC who was the shooter, who killed the police officer there. I did not see some vast public self-flagellation when the two state senators in Minnesota were, this was just in June when they were killed. There was just vast mockery in the case of the Pelosi one. So, like, if one more time, the right is very, very good at inventorying what they perceive to be the ills of their opponents without having the same kind of skeptical and interrogating eye and again, some of that can just be loosely aligned because there's crazies on both sides, but to what extent there is any kind of political alignment. More to the point, as I said at the beginning of this, we still do not actually know what the hell the shooter's motivations are, and the reporting around this has been inconsistent and unreliable to this point at best. At best. So listen, if it actually turns out that there are some that the person is some kind of genuine, left-wing nut job, then we're going to have to revisit this conversation, and I'm happy to do so. And in fact, I actually looked this up a little bit ahead of time. There is some research to indicate that since 2021, there has been a growth in the amount of left-wing political violence. However, the study that I saw and the authors therein said that it is still in numerically much more a function. Our political violence is much more a function of right-wing political violence, and this is what's been measured. I'm happy to provide the study when this is over. I don't have it in front of me, but if you want, you can email me, lukethomasnews@gmail.com. And we don't even know what the motivations are of this shooter. So, also, can anyone tell me what the motivations were of Thomas Matthew Crooks, the Trump would-be assassin? Like, I could not tell you coherently what his worldview is. I don't know that we know much about him, which seems, I don't know what the story is there. I don't know why we don't know much about him, but we seemingly don't. He did leave a quiet and, I don't know, deranged life, but you're making him out to be some kind of card-carrying member of the Democratic Socialists of America when there's really no evidence whatsoever to indicate any of that either. So let's be very careful about and how we categorize political violence and to what extent we attribute, polarization and radicalization and partisan rancor as key contributors. Luke, I really appreciate your view on the subject. Both guns and alcohol kill people when misused, but alcohol deaths are far higher. If we ban guns, shouldn't the same logic apply to alcohol? Well, not necessarily. There is no constitutional amendment protecting access to alcohol in the Constitution. There is one for guns, and that is a key and important difference. For example, Japan has it enshrined in their constitution, essentially that there are exceptions, but there basically cannot be widespread gun use. It's enshrined in their constitution, and ours is the opposite, at least through the Bill of Rights and the Second Amendment, that you actually can be able to purchase and own firearms, and there are some conditions about this. But I would say that we actually regulate alcohol in some ways much more extensively than we do. Well, that's not totally true, but we have the capacity and the willingness to regulate alcohol more thoroughly if we want. It's one of these questions that's a separate question from guns per se, because the way in which that we interface with them and then how they interact with the world is different. And what you can reasonably do about one in either case is also different. And the harms are similar, but also in many ways quite distinct, so that you cannot regulate them more exactly the same. And the truth is about regulating alcohol, it's the same thing with marijuana. If you're going to allow a society to use these substances to avoid, just criminalizing this kind of behavior more broadly, then you're making some trade-offs about what kinds of things happen as a consequence. Now, there's a question about what those trade-offs should be and how significant they should be. But for example, we allow a certain amount of alcohol consumption, but we have a car culture here as well, and I think the two are an incredibly toxic mix. I think we should do more to mitigate that. Is that not selling alcohol? Well, I mean, there's some ways you could enforce that, but it seems to me, for example, you're going to laugh at this, but it's true. In places where you have better public transportation, you obviously have fewer DUIs. Right? In places where you have access, where people who have access to bus routes, light rail, metros, these are places that have significantly fewer homicide deaths. Or sorry, what am I saying? Homicide deaths from car accidents. So it's a question of like what kind of community investment and what kind of public solutions you're talking about here. I would humbly submit we don't do enough about either of these problems. But the one thing I'm going to say about the guns that I tried to tell everyone about is you could make an argument in this case. Okay, so let's say that the weapon that the investigators discovered here is the relevant weapon in case, right? Which would have been what was the name of that weapon? It was some kind of caliber rifle. I forget the caliber. The caliber rifle that would essentially be just a hunting rifle that by itself would be under most gun laws, even lax ones, or even strenuous ones would still be legal. Like I think it's actually illegal in England under certain conditions. But of course, the difference is that the broader set of gun laws that they have, and it would make a huge difference, as well as even if you wanted to ignore that fact, you would still have to reconcile with the fact that there was also another shooting at the exact same time in Denver at a high school. Like we are clearly awash in firearms. But this is my pitch. My pitch is very simple. The Rand Corporation has put together this. I've talked about it before. This entire gun study, and it's just designed to match what is the evidence for something like, red flag laws, or mandatory 7-day waiting period, or any kind of law, any kind of intervention. What kind of evidence do we have based on this to make a claim about how effective it is as a deterrent or whatever in gun violence? And the overwhelming consensus that they show in every case is that we don't have nearly enough information, because the government has purposely not studied it for the vast majority of my life. They only recently started doing that the last couple of years, but to a very, very minimal amount. They have to vastly increase it. And I would just ask people, what could possibly be the harm in getting more studies done to actually see what works and what doesn't in terms of policy interventions to meaningfully mitigate the harms that come from firearms ownership? Like, I don't understand how that's even remotely debatable. You can then have a conversation about like what you're supposed to do about that. But let me look this up, the Rand Corp, so I can share it with you. Let's see. Where is it? See more facts. What is this? Oh yeah, the science of gun policy. That's what it is. The science of gun policy from the Rand Corporation, like Ayn Rand. Go look at it. They have all these matrices of all these different kinds of interventions, but they cannot stress enough, we simply just don't know enough. We have some evidence that some stuff works. We have some evidence that some stuff doesn't work that well. But at a bare minimum, what we need more broadly is that. I think we have to start there. Let's collect information about what we know and don't know about firearms violence, and then make some calls about it. But tackling the problem of firearm violence is not tantamount to tackling the problems of alcohol. They require society to do different things, and they're differently administered.